Hi everyone. In this lesson, I suggest we focus on creating our own wrapper for form creation. As we can see, we have 4 pages with forms. The login page, registration page, idea creation page, and idea editing page all essentially have duplicated code. That is, we have things like submit, some repeated actions. Here's a bunch of wrappers with loading and 2 alerts. And we copy this everywhere. It's not very convenient because if we want to improve the behavior of our forms, we'll have to go to every single instance of it. Well, that's not right. We need to create our own wrapper. Moreover, if you ever decide to get a job instead of working as a startup developer for hire, you might find that many organizations use exactly this approach. They just copy everything indiscriminately, reuse everything. Forms work differently, and they forget to transfer some good things into the form. And that's bad. You shouldn't do it that way. You need to create your own wrapper. Let's get started with that. I have already created a file in which I made the wrapper. But when you are making your own small library, even within one of your projects, you need to start thinking about it, not from its implementation, but from how you will use it. That's why I suggest we first apply it to the sign-in page and then analyze how it works inside. That is, we first imagine how it would be convenient for us to use it. Okay, let's see what we can take from here and reuse everywhere. We'll do this using the login page as an example. Here's everything related to submitting ROR. Well, obviously it works the same way. Initially, it's null. If an error occurs in the onSubmit method, the error should be set. At the start of form submission, the error should be reset. And if there is still an error, it should be displayed here. All right, so that's it. We know this will be used from somewhere. Let's delete this from here. All of it. We are no longer interested. Later. This is our success message. Yes, later. We have such a feature that when some form elements are invalid, we, in addition to showing it on those elements, display a message that some elements are invalid. In short forms, this is usually redundant because all fields are visible on the screen anyway. And if you submitted the form and there are errors, you will see those errors on the inputs. But sometimes forms are long, and sometimes you submitted a form and there are errors in some upper input, but you didn't send the form further, and the person doesn't see where the error is. And in that case, it's convenient to show such a message. Therefore, in some forms it would be good to keep it. In some forms it would be good to remove it. Nevertheless, it can all be handled by our wrapper. So we will also remove this and source it from our form. Then, in our form on the sign-in page, this is not present. But, for example, on the new idea page, we have a success message for form submission. And this, of course, will also go into the wrapper. But the wrapper must be able to make it optional. That is, sometimes do it, sometimes not. Because when creating an idea, we have it now, but not during authorization, as there's a redirect immediately after success. All right. Then this part of the form is necessary. That is, these are some really individual things. That is, sending this specific mutation, setting the token, invalidating past requests, and direct. So we leave that, but we no longer need try-catch here. We implement this try-catch within our wrapper. Then, what else is inconvenient here? We have to import with .schema into every form. I don't like that either. Let our wrapper accept zood directly, and then under the hood, it will implement this in the required schema. Okay? And then we have the information that forming and submitting are here. All right, but we will also do this under the hood of our wrapper. Let's try to apply it even without knowing how it's implemented. We will create a hook called useForm, and it will return forming, button props, and alert props. Instead of validate, we will write validation.schema, because after all, it's some sort of schema. Okay? In forming, our usual forming comes to us. In button props, we'll receive everything important for our button. What's important there? It's important to show if it's, for example, loading or disabled. All this will be under the hood of our wrapper. We can pass props like this. Button props. We might also have alert props. And there might be information about whether the alert should be red or green, or what the text should be. At the same time, if, for example, there is no alert, it will contain information that it's absent, right? And that's why we can insert a universal alert here. So, and pass alert props to it accordingly. Okay, we can now remove some dependencies from here, and the form has become much tidier. Let's also apply this directly to the new idea page, and then we'll go through how it works under the hood. It's important to note that everything repetitive from this form has been removed, and now the code became much shorter and contains only the important information for this component. Everything else remains under the hood of useForm. Let's apply the same to new idea, okay? Well, we can easily just copy this from here. Button, alert props. New idea. The only thing is now it's called create idea, yes. We can remove all this pile. We don't need this anymore either. Various try-catch blocks aren't needed anymore, and success messages aren't needed here either. Okay, and the only thing is now it's not useForm, but useForm. Formic button props, alert props. And this is now the validation schema. Okay, so, great. The only thing we need to do now is, we had a success message here, right? We need to show it back. We have a wrapper for this ready. Idea create, yes, that's what it will be called. Please, we can insert it. We have a success message here. Idea create. Okay. And now, once again, only what's important for this form remains, and all the unnecessary has been removed. All right, now let's break down this useForm hook. There will be a bit of TypeScript magic related to generics. Well, it's a chance to dive a little deeper into them. Let's first deal with the input parameters. Well, useForm is a hook, and as we can see, when we call it, we pass some object into it. What can be in this object? Success message. It can be a string, it may not be passed, or it can be false. This will mean the same in the work as if we didn't pass it. It's just convenient for us like this. Initially, the success message is absent. Then, reset on success. Here we have such a thing. This is important, for example, in the form with creating a new idea. Here we use to clear our form at the moment of submission. And by default, this reset on success is true. That is, we want this. But on the sign-in page, as we remember, we didn't want this. We didn't want it to reset so that our form wouldn't blink and just redirect us. Therefore, here we can set it to false. By default, it's true. Then show validation alert. This is the information about the message that says some of our inputs are invalid. Sign in is a short form, so we don't need it. By default, it's false, as we intended. And in creating a new idea, well, let's consider it a kind of long form. And here, therefore, we want to show it. Let's apply it. Show validation alert true. Good. Then initial values. Well, here it's directly analogous to Formic. The only thing, let's pay attention to the type. Okay, here we have initial values. We pass them here, and they are like this. But in the validation schema, we pass a Zod schema. Zod schemas are structured in such a way that Zod schemas have this type. More precisely, inherited from it. Right? And we say that we have a certain generic, which we will call, we've come up with this name tzod schema, which inherits from this type. Our tzod schema will be the validation schema. Because of this. When we declare the validation schema, the TZO'd schema type gets the actual type of this schema. That is, the real type that should be inherited from it. But it inherits because it is created through Zod. Good. He came here. And the initial values should, let's say, match the schema. But they themselves are not a schema. Zod has a helper called infer. This means getting a type defined by the schema. And that's why our initial values will automatically be validated based on the Zod schema. Here's an example. For instance, in password, if we now write a string, it will highlight in red. Because it says that password should be a string, it knows that the password should be a string because we have this input, this Zod schema, which states that the password is a string. And it's convenient for us. Good. And then we have onSubmit. Since onSubmit is passed to Formic, we need types matching those in Formic. Our values correspond exactly to the types specified in the validation schema, and actions simply pass to Formic's onSubmit. There are some Formic helpers, and they have this type. So we say that these are Formic helpers with exactly the same type as initial values or values. And this thing returns a promise if we have an async function in onSubmit, or not a promise if we have a regular function there. All right, so these are our input parameters. Let's now look at the content of the function itself. Here we already have our familiar success, message visible, and set success message visible. What we did before in each individual form, the same applies to submitting error. It's known that this error now contains not a string, but an actual error. It will be easier for us to work with. All right, then we just declare Formic. And for ease of use of Formic's types, we push this, again, type of our values into it, because we will return this Formic later. And we need to know the types of our Formic here in the sign-in page to use it somewhere. This will just come in handy and be convenient to apply there. Okay? We pass the initial values in the initial values. At the same time, if we don't have these initial values, or they are optional, we will pass an empty object there. Because Formic breaks if you don't pass an object to it. Though we currently have them set as mandatory, but still. Okay. In principle, it can be declared like this, and it will be the same. You can do it like this. No problem, it won't change. Everything will stay the same. Okay? Even in this situation, you can do it this way. Let it be this way. All right. Later. Validation scheme again may or may not be. Maybe we want to pass validate separately, right? And then we just add it to the parameters, meaning no one forbids improving this form later. Okay? If we pass the validation scheme, then we will have an object with validate. And this will be the Zod scheme that we have already seen in our previous forms. Then here's our onSubmit, which we pass into Formic itself. And here's our usual try, catch, set error to null. We do the onSubmit that we passed here, so our onSubmit from the form. We literally call this function with the appropriate values and Formic helpers. Again, if there's an error inside our form, we'll end up in catch and set submitting error to error. If there are no errors here, it means we specified that we want reset on success in the parameters. Our form's initial values will be reset. Then we set the error message to true, and also reset it after 3 seconds. Yes, you notice that technically we might not have a success message, but we'll handle that a bit later. It's important to know that if it were present, it would be installed. Because, essentially, we're just discussing whether it should be here, visible, or shouldn't be visible, ideally. Let's move on. We've defined Formic, and later we'll simply return it from this hook. Therefore, it will be accessible here, but we also return button props and alert props. Let's see how we declare them. Look, we have alert props, and we're using the React hook, useMemo. I just wanted to show it to you. This construction allows alert props not to be calculated each time unnecessarily. but only when one of the dependencies changes. In fact, fundamentally from a logic perspective, nothing would prevent you from performing all these calculations without using the useMemo hook. Simply thanks to useMemo, they will be output less frequently. Specifically, only when values it depends on change. So, how is everything calculated here? Essentially, this function is called immediately once we reach this point, which is passed inside alert props. We also specify the type for these alert props. Where did the alert props type come from? I declared it in the alert component. So, you can check here. There are small changes. Previously, the type was specified directly against a red background. You can see how it was. We had our object and its type. I made it so that now its type is declared separately and then used here to apply this type in other places. Here, the same parameters apply except for the hidden parameter. To conveniently use this alert in our form without doing something like alert, props, hidden, not hidden, and then like this. That's just longer to write and inconvenient. I thought it would be better if the alert props simply receives hidden, and if it suddenly is hidden, it just returns null. That way, it's more convenient for us to apply. And if it's not hidden, then the alert returns in the exact same form as it did before. All right, let's move on to the form component. All set. If there is a submitting error, we return the following props for the alert that will later be passed into the alert. This means it's not hidden. Children are what is displayed inside the message. From the error, we take the message, and its color is red. Okay, that's all. Since there's a return here, we won't go further. But if there was no submitting error, we have the next check. Do we want to show a validation alert? And if we do, and the form is invalid, and it has been submitted at least once, then again this alert needs to be shown. It should be read and contain some text. Some fields are invalid. Okay, assuming this check didn't pass, then we proceed further. If we have a success message visible that we defined at the point of form submission, and we have a success message defined when we called the hook useForm, here we do, for example, the success message is present. Since we defined the success message, the alert should be green and not hidden, and it should have the exact success message we wanted. And if none of these checks pass, then we don't need this alert. Here, color red is simply because it must be declared anyway. Our alert types imply that we have some color, but it doesn't matter. It could be green because it will still be hidden, and it will have no children. That's it. And our alert props store the corresponding alert props here. That's it, we got them. Later, they will also be returned from this hook, and therefore will be available here. Now let's look at the button props. The logic is exactly the same. Also use meme, but they change only when the formic changes from submitting. So here we just insert formic from submitting into loading, or not from submitting. And that's it. And then from this hook, we return formic alert props and button props, and therefore they are available on the sign-in page. Now, you can continue working with the form. When you notice any more repeating patterns in your forms, you can simply add them here. Here, about generics. In fact, this is a pretty good example. They're not that complicated. I would briefly talk about them again now. Actually, they need to be studied. They need to be used. And most often, you'll only have to write them when you're creating some kind of micro libraries or micro wrappers. And it might be a bit difficult to apply them initially, but thanks to the fact that you made such a thing, it will be very convenient for you to use it in the code later. You'll have countless forms in the project, but all of them will have good types, and it will be easy for you to use them. So it's satisfying to create them because it's nice to work with them later. Let me explain about generics once more. We declared a generic and we say it must extend this type. What will happen thanks to this? If we pass something that doesn't match this type, it will complain to us. It says that number doesn't fit the zot type we declared here. And that's good. It doesn't let us write something incorrect. So when we pass something correct here, it passes through. So this is validation just for the thing itself. And, as we see, this generic is usually assigned to some specific thing. Here's the validation schema. And therefore, in this tsot schema type, the type that will be assigned will actually have the validation schema right here. So not some hypothetical zot object, but a specific zot object. So this type will specifically depend inside our tzot schema during this declaration. And that's it. And now we have zot schema, and based on it, we can understand the type of some other things in this object. And thanks to this, we can understand what our initial values are, what our values are, and what our types are in Formic. Now, we will work more with generics. You will hopefully write some of them yourself for some of your other wrappers. And eventually, you'll figure this all out. Generics are a very good thing. You need to learn them. You need to know them. Well, we have covered this component, and let's continue applying it to our forms. So, we have a sign-in page. Here, we have already applied everything. Good. Okay. Then we have the new idea page. Let's see if everything is fine here. We show validation alert, and we have a success message. But let's apply it now on the edit idea page. The same thing. We have a validation alert here, and there's an update idea button. Good. Update idea. All right. We won't have success messages here. We don't need this now. These are now button props, alert props. It's now useForm. This, we now have validation schema. We pass this type there. Wrappers are no longer needed. Good. So, and we want no reset on success here. By default, it's true, but we don't pass a success message because it's not needed here. Good. So we've simplified this form too. And let's have a look further. So we need show validation alert. We had it. So, by default, it's false. Yes, default is false. And reset on success is true. Here we need the opposite. I set these default values because that's what you usually need. So usually your form is submitted and you don't redirect anyone anywhere. You just need to clear everything. And usually your forms are short, so we don't show validation alerts at the bottom since all errors are visible anyway. All right, we've done edit idea page. Now only sign up remains, okay? Formic, button props, alert props, use form. Got it. Validation schema, Asians. Okay, then various wrappers are redundant. Good. Now we need an alert and a button. So, the button is called sign up, Okay. We can delete this. Right, so. Well, we won't show a validation alert here. We also don't need a success message. But if anything, we need reset on success. So it's not there because we'll redirect from here anyway. So the submitting error here became redundant too. All right? Good. Let's see if we have any complaints. Extra dependencies. Good. 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 Let's check if these things work in the browser. Make sure we haven't broken anything. All right, well, let's check. We have user PPP. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sign in? Yes. Nothing broke. Well, that's just Chrome offering to save passwords. Okay, good. Let's add ID. Okay, this is ID. All right, create ID. There we go. We have this validation message here. Create ID. ID created. Excellent. Okay, now we need to check editing. update ID. It worked. All right. And if we, for example, give it an existing username, yes, server errors are also displayed perfectly. Right. We've looked at creation and editing. Uh-huh. Yes. Edit works. And let's also do the registration form. For example, it'll be KKK123412345. Passwords do not match. Great. 1234. Redirect. Everything is working. Yes, that is, nothing is broken. Everything works. And now there is much less code on the pages themselves. Only that which really defines the work of these components. We hid everything else in the useForm wrapper. Thank you all. Let's move on. To be continued. Continuation.